Hello. Can everyone hear us? Hello, hello. So, thank you so much for the introduction. I don't know if folks heard it, but we've got a tremendous group here today. When we're thinking about Western Hemisphere policy, we've really got some of the key players here. So I think if you didn't hear, I just want to introduce really quickly Juan Gonzalez. I think you all know who Juan is. Todd Robinson, Brian Nichols, and MARCELA ESCOBARI. Thank you so much. So, as we were talking about what to talk about, we were thinking about what are you all really thinking about? One thing I'm thinking about is Brazil. So I want to start with you, Brian, and I want to know what's going to happen in Brazil. Brian, I've worked with Brian before. He's very wise.
Thank you very much, and I hesitate to answer with so many people who know more about Brazil in the room than I do. What I will say is that we have prioritized our relationship with Brazil from the beginning of this administration. We have been engaging regularly across the spectrum and across institutions in Brazil to talk about our shared democratic values, the importance that we place on the relationship. Juan and I talk about Brazil all the time and about how important it is to engage and how important it is to get it right in terms of supporting Brazilians in their electoral process. The future of the relationship, I think, is very bright. We have shared values. We're working together right now in the UN Security Council. We have a really tremendous shared interest with the Brazilian people and a country that's vital for our hemisphere and vital for the world to engage. I think that you saw Brazilian institutions respond in a very strong and appropriate way throughout the electoral process. And I think you're going to see that continue through the transition and into the next government. I'm going to stop there. I see Tom Shannon out there and Mike McKinley and my principal deputy, Ricardo Zuniga, who all know way more about this than I do. So I'm going to stop talking, but I think maybe you could get Juan to tell you about what the president and Lula talked about when they spoke.
Yes, tell us, Juan.
I thought I was going to get another question. So I'll start by saying that I usually don't get nervous at these things anymore, but looking at Tom Shannon right here, because everything I know about Latin America I've learned from him. Look, the conversation between the two presidents really focused on the strength of Brazilian institutions. And both leaders agreed that it wasn't really that Lula won or that Bolsonaro lost, but that Brazilian institutions and Brazilian democracy won. I think that's absolutely the case. And I think the way the international community really responded it shows that really democracy in the hemispheres is still alive and well despite all the challenges that we're facing. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Excuse me. So my next question is for you, MARCELA. So USAID has been a key partner to countries responding to the historic migration flows. So what are your migration-related priorities post-summit? It was 5 months ago. And the implementation of the Los Angeles Declaration in particular. What are some of the next steps on this issue?
Great. Well, thank you for having us. I'm glad that I can't see with the light and everybody's on their third glass of wine, so anything that I say. No, look, migration is really a massive challenge right now. It's 7 million people displaced in Latin America, bigger than the Syrian crisis. Over 5 million of those are from Venezuela. And only less than 4% of those Venezuelans have reached our border. So the massive challenge is really in the region. And the region is rising up to the occasion. I think what the LA Declaration gives us is really a framework to work with the region, to work in a regional way, in a collaborative way, around priorities that the way we see it are around 3 areas of focus. One is root causes, but that's our day job at USAID. Second is creating and expanding legal pathways so that people can actually migrate in conditions of safety and in conditions of mutual benefit. And we're expanding those in real ways. And lastly, which I think is probably the largest initiative in terms of numbers, is the integration of migrants in host communities. And we have seen, just countries rise up in very admirable ways on the policy, right? Colombia with temporary protective status for 10 years to over 2.4 million Venezuelans. Ecuador with 500,000 Venezuelans. You cross the border, you have access to education and health in Ecuador. And just came back from Peru, where Peru did a dramatic thing during COVID. It gave degree validation to those Venezuelans on 500 occupations in healthcare during COVID, and they were able to use their talents immediately to respond. Now, what we hope is that that momentum becomes something that the whole region promulgates and emulates. It's a very fragile momentum, because between populism and xenophobia, it can turn the other way. But I think it's up to us to support, and that's what the LA Declaration and folks around here, and probably everybody over there, are doing to support this. Because, and the last thing, most of the things that we work on at USAID are making bad things less bad. Hurricane hits, less malnutrition, less hunger. This is one of the few things that if we do it right, it can turn from a human tragedy to really the engine of growth and recovery for the region. So I think it's a good opportunity, and we're taking it.
Thank you so much, Marcela. Todd, I'm going to turn to you now. So Todd Robinson has a global portfolio, but I like to think your heart remains in the Western Hemisphere. I met Todd when he was ambassador to Guatemala, and just an amazing, amazing ambassador. Like I said, you have a large portfolio. What are the administration's priorities when it comes to Western Hemisphere?
Well, what I would say is the administration's priorities circle around one number: 108,000. 108,000 Americans died of synthetic opioid-related incidences, the vast majority of them from fentanyl. That is where my remit is, and that is what the Biden-Harris administration has asked me to focus on. That means working with countries like India, where the precursor chemicals are coming from, China, getting other countries to help us work with China on making sure that the precursors are stopped. It's very hard. Obviously, the relationship with China is such that we're not talking directly on these things. We used to have a regular yearly dialogue with China on law enforcement, security, and drug trafficking, and we don't have that anymore, and we really need it. And we need other countries to help us convince China that that's the right way to go. We also have to work with the countries in the region. Mexico continues to be a great partner in this effort to fight, to bring greater security not only to their people, but to the citizens of the United States. They have a large part to play in going after the gangs and the networks that are producing these drugs. We have to work with Colombia. Colombia just had an election. They have a president with a different vision. We still have to find a way to work with these countries and show them the benefits of the breadth and depth of our relationship. And that's what we're doing. That's what the administration expects, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much. I just see that I only have 5 minutes left. I have so many more questions. So I'm going to ask Juan a question about Venezuela and the administration's Venezuela policy. What can we expect in the coming months?
Thanks, Rebecca. So let me start by, think highly recommending people read the National Security Strategy. A lot of people tell me they stopped reading after the China section, but if you keep going, you will see that the Latin America section is actually significantly robust and is at our attempt at really having a geopolitical view of the region. I'm going to get to your Venezuela question, but in that first paragraph, there's a key statement of policy that the region's democratic development is fundamentally in the national security interests of the United States, regardless of a country's political ideology. I think that's a fundamental statement, not just because we've, in the hemisphere, tried autocratic governments and revolutionary governments and reaffirmed democracy as the model, but really that in a complicated political dynamic, focusing on the democratic process is key. And I think in some ways has disarmed the critique of U.S. policy by some of the governments of the left that have been elected and created a space for us to have a dialogue on countries like Venezuela and the situation there. The point I'll make on this is that I think the premise that a maximum pressure strategy will lead to regime change is wrong, and everybody who studies sanctions knows that that just does not work. Sanctions are a powerful tool. Is the answer to unilaterally lift sanctions? That is also not the answer, and frankly, when you have people in power that are using those funds for other purposes than actually benefit the people who are leaving the country en masse, the unilateral lifting of sanctions also is not the answer. So the president's direction, he's been consistent from the campaign trail to governing, which is supporting a Venezuelan-led process that leads to the restoration of free and fair elections. Are we going to have a Jeffersonian democracy in Venezuela tomorrow? No, but I think steps in that direction are ones that will lead to the alleviation of sanctions pressure. And I think it requires some strategic patience. It requires active diplomatic competitiveness that is being led, I think, incredibly actively and well by Brian Nichols in the State Department. It requires really a recognition that we need to support a Venezuelan-led process and not impose or try to impose some sort of outcome that fits either our short-term political interests or is not informed by really what leads to objective, productive outcomes.
Thank you so much, Juan. Do I have time for one more? Oh, okay. So not really. So what I'll do is very quickly a lightning round. We've been talking a lot about the challenges. So just very quickly, and we can start with you, Marcela, go around. When you think about what about the opportunities in the region, you spoke of one when it comes to migration. But just each of you, just if you could tell us what you see as the greatest opportunity in the region.
All right, I only speak in 3 bullets because everything comes in 3, but I will be fast in the 3. One is food security. It is a crisis, but I think we have some of the most significant food producers in the world in our region, so they should rise up to the occasion. Policies can change so they're export focused, and I think the fact that fertilizer has tripled has meant that a lot more farmers are changing their practices, and and I think a lot more can happen there. Nearshoring, it's real, but it's not going to happen for free. Right? There's the $50 billion CHIPS Act is going to mean a bunch of nearshoring on packaging, on assembly, on inputs. But they're for countries that really, respect rule of law and have good governance. $1.8 billion in textiles in Central America. These opportunities are real, but it's for countries that make themselves, conducive for this kind of investment. And third, I think. People are clamoring for more inclusive growth. And I think there is, for a region that has become the most unequal in the world, I think it's an opportunity for companies that, the pandemic has brought digitization, financial inclusion. So we have amazing entrepreneurs like the fellow you gave the award to. It's incredible. And they're rising up to this challenge of giving that last mile to people. And governments need to do the same. Right? And if they reform tax, rural development, et cetera, I think we'll be able to take this moment and turn it into an opportunity and not, more populism and authoritarianism. So we're working for the former. Thank you. Brian.
Well, Marcela covered a lot, and so the Summit of the Americas was a huge event for our hemisphere, and we're able to build on that summit in a number of key areas. Access to finance and programs that can transform the energy mix of our hemisphere, that can provide good jobs and opportunities from pole to pole in our region. The opportunity to focus on access to good-paying jobs, more and better access to health care, transformational programmings to improve governance in our region are all parts of that summit process. And while there was a lot of back and forth about different elements of the event, the reality is the nations of our hemisphere unanimously agreed to 5 pillars in the summit that didn't get a lot of public attention, but really contain all of those elements. And I think the opportunity and the challenge that we have as a region is to use the institutions of our region, our multilateral development banks, the governments, academia, private sector partners, and civil society to make those commitments a reality, and that's one of my key goals for the coming year.
Thank you, Brian. Todd.
Yeah, I'm still impressed with the march of democracy in our region. We've had a series of elections now. People have made choices in most of the countries except, well, one large one to the north. The institutions functioned the right way. And I think the news or reports of democracy's death in the region were clearly overstated. And I think that's great. Now, the challenge is, if these democracies do not find a way to get at some of the things they talked about, like inequality, and don't find a way to fight the corruption that's tearing some of their countries apart, then we may be facing a real challenge. But right now, democracy is looking pretty good, and we're all here to continue supporting it.
Great. Thank you, Todd.
I'll be very brief. So, look, we're obviously facing a lot of crises in the Western Hemisphere, but I'll tell you that the unorthodox, or the kind of not direct answer to your question is, I feel like we are incredibly fortunate as a U.S. government to have such experienced career diplomats and civil servants. As somebody who served as a civil servant and then moved to the political side, I've worked at the White House, I worked at the State Department. You know, I consider myself very lucky to be working with people like Brian Nichols, even though he doesn't let me tweet anymore, and Todd, and really seeing the wealth of expertise. I've known you since you were Director of Caribbean Affairs. Todd, I've known you for a long time, Marcela, but it is the reality that at a time when we went through a very difficult period in terms of how the Department of State really functions, at the end of the day, it's resilient, and the people there really, really understand the region and are very passionate about these issues and are driving policy in a direction that advances our national security interests. And I think we can celebrate that for what it is and really what it's doing for the United States.
Thank you so much, all of you. And I just have to add to Juan's point that I had the pleasure to serve with each and every one of you up here on the panel. And I just want to say how much respect I have for you, and I really appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Thank you so much.
That was actually incredibly fascinating. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. It is now time to resume our awards ceremony. And to present our next leadership award, I'd like to introduce the co-chair of the Dialogue's Board of Directors. And it is actually a great honor to do this, the first female president of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla. Yes, indeed. Wait a second, I have to do the thing. President Chinchilla has had an illustrious career in public service, serving as Congressperson, Vice President, Minister of Public Security, and Minister of Justice. In addition to being a respected expert on institutional reform, the rule of law, democracy, and public security issues, she is a champion for protecting our oceans, and I did not know this, but now I do, was named Shark Guardian of the Year for banning trade in shark fins while president, which is amazing. She has been considered by Forbes magazine one of the most influential female leaders in Central America, and so I ask you to please join me in welcoming the co-chair of the Dialogue's Board of Directors, President Laura Chinchilla.
Buenas noches. Buenas noches, queridas amigas y amigos. Es una enorme alegría poder volver a reencontrarnos después de 3 años de obligada suspensión de esta linda actividad. Nesta noite, nós temos muitos brasileiros e, sobretudo, brasileiras. 2 mesas. 2 mesas. Aplauso para eles. Aplauso para eles. And that's all I will say in Portuñol. Dear friends, if one can identify the main purpose behind past, present, and future leadership for the Americas Awards Gala, that will be the opportunity to put a face to our dearest aspirations for the region, to put a name to our hopes for peace and prosperity, to being able to say thank you directly to those who make our continent a better place. More than frequently in our endeavors, we speak of democracy, prosperity, equality, amongst other grand concepts, without stopping for a second to think how those aims are realized daily. Today, however, we can do so as we welcome Luiza Trajano in this stage. Luiza is chairman of Magazine Luiza, one of the largest retailers in Brazil, and chair of Grupo Mulheres do Brasil, which brings more than 105,000 participants throughout the country with the objective to encourage female empowerment and participation in all sectors of Brazilian society. She was named Person of the Year 2020 by the Brazil-US Chamber of Commerce. In 2021, she was chosen as the only Brazilian in the prestigious Time 100 list, and by the Financial Times as one of the 25 most influential women in the world. In the noise of current problems affecting the Americas and the rest of the world, from wars to famines, from climate change to inflation, it is easy to lose sight of the wonderful people that are reaching out to help others, of the leaders that are using their power, whether economic, social, or political, to do good, to simply do good. As important as democratic institutions and macroeconomic principles are, we should not forget that it is the people behind those institutions and principles and behind companies, schools, and international organizations who are the ones shaping our world. Identifying and recognizing who is shaping the world in the form of a more diverse, equal, and prosperous one is an imperative for fora like the one that gather us here today. But at the dialogue, we recognize Luiza's fantastic career and work, not only because her achievements reflect ideals dearest for us, but also because of what they represent in terms of the north that we want to follow. When we say that economic prosperity can go hand in hand with embracing democratic principles and promoting human rights, we no longer need to reference a book or an academic theory. Instead, we can look at Luiza's legacy. Dear Luiza, she is there. wait, Luiza, not yet. Dear Luiza, thank you for your leadership and generosity. Thank you for being an example of hard work and creativity. Thank you for showing us, in the words of the great Brazilian poet Cecília Meirelles, que a vida só é possível reinventada. Life is only possible reinvented. Dear friends, please accompany me with an applause to invite Luiza Trajano, recipient of the Distinguished Leadership for the Americas Award for Social Equity, to the stage. Thank you.
Muito boa noite. Eu vou ter uma intérprete. Aí, depois dessas palavras, muita emoção. Muito obrigada a todos vocês, dessa organização maravilhosa que está me fazendo uma noite inesquecível. Obrigada, Thomas. Obrigado, Rebeca. Obrigado, Gastão, que com tanto carinho tiveram comigo. É muito importante, a gente tem muitas coisas difíceis, mas esse reconhecimento e essas palavras da Laura faz nunca desistir. Parabéns a toda a equipe organizadora, muito perfeita, vocês não imaginam os bastidores, é agora, é tudo muito organizado. Quero também agradecer ao Conselho e pedir licença para vocês para agradecer minha querida amiga Fernanda, que não só me indicou, como lutou muito para que isso acontecesse. Muito obrigada, Fernanda.
Hi, good evening. We will have interpreting services. Thank you so much. Thank you. I am feeling deeply moved. Thank you so much for the organizers. This is being a wonderful evening. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, President. Thank you all. This will live in my heart forever. I will treasure this. There have been, the path here has been long and hard, but these recognitions, these accolades make everything worth it. Thank you, Laura, for never giving up. Thank you again for to the organizers. Thank you, council members, and thank you, Fernanda, for referring me and pursuing this.
Como todos que aqui tiveram, é muita emoção. Depois de 2 anos de pandemia, a gente estar aqui e sem máscaras. É uma coisa muito boa. Eu acho que eu pensei, será que eu vou viver isso um dia?
I am feeling deeply moved. After 2 years of a pandemic, being here and not having to wear masks is amazing. And I often wondered, will I be able to see this one of these days?
Apesar de toda a tristeza do Covid, aprendemos algumas lições importantes. Eu acredito que a parada da correria, do dia a dia, fez a gente enfrentar a desigualdade social, a discriminação em todos os sentidos. Pelo menos no Brasil, isso foi muito forte. Nós tivemos quase 400 anos de escravidão. E a escravidão deixou no Brasil coisas muito sérias, como a desigualdade social, como a libertação que não existiu, mas ela deixou também, emocionalmente, o não pertencer ao país, e a Covid trouxe isso de volta.
Despite all the sadness that COVID brought us, it also brought us very important lessons. And we were interrupted in the flow of our daily lives. We had to face things such as social disparities, discriminations in all senses. And in Brazil, where we had over 400 years of slavery, we see that there is a freedom of slavery that didn't really exist because a lot of people do not yet have a sense of belonging that COVID brought back.
Politicamente, o mundo está vivendo uma divisão política que causa grande apreensão. É um momento de divisão, esquerda, direita, mas de uma forma muito radical. E o Brasil não ficou longe disso. Acabamos de passar por uma eleição apertada e dividida. Apesar de termos uma democracia de poucos anos, como disse aqui no painel, as instituições democratas estão consolidadas. Ela vai prevalecer. E eu garanto a vocês que nós, brasileiros, não vamos deixar a democracia acabar. Nós somos uns grandes lutadores dela.
We have a very peculiar situation in the world. There's a lot of political division, which has caused us great apprehensions. We see left and right, and to the point of extremism and radicalization. Brazil is no different. We have just finished a very divided and tight election process in our young democracy. However, there will be a consolidation of institutions. There will be democracy. Brazil will not let democracy die. We will fight for democracy.
Eu desde sempre tive uma convicção comigo que a sociedade civil tem um papel importantíssimo nisso tudo. Por isso, temos uma empresa de 40 mil funcionários, de 1.600 unidades, que é o Magalu, que começou físico e transformou em digital, mas que a gente luta, presidente Laura, com todas as forças para ter uma empresa de propósito e com lucro. Não é fácil numa sociedade, mas nós estamos há 25 anos entre as melhores empresas para se trabalhar, crescendo muito por ano. É uma luta muito grande de uma família que tem, acima de tudo, o emprego como meta. São mais de 80 mil pessoas que vivem de lá.
I have always believed that civil society plays an important role in society at large. And that's why Magazine Luiza has 40,000 employees, 1,600 stores. First, we had brick and mortar stores and now digital stores. It's been constant, our fight to stay afloat with purpose, with profit. It has not been easy, but for 25 years, we have been one of the best companies to work for. And we continue to grow. And that's how you can see a lot of people who would otherwise be unemployed working for us.
Temos também um grande exemplo. Há 9 anos atrás, pensando na sociedade civil, eu, junto com mais 40 mulheres, muitas delas aqui, fomos para um evento em Brasília e, a partir daí, a gente resolveu chamar um Grupo Mulheres do Brasil. Nós temos mais de 106 mil mulheres de todas as classes sociais, de todos os níveis. Somos um grupo políticos, superpartidário, porque porque a gente acredita que é políticas públicas que mudam um país. E é a sociedade civil organizada e juntas que nós vamos conseguir isso. Eu acredito também, e convoco todos vocês, que através do feminino que tem dentro da mulher e de cada um dos homens, que nós vamos realmente fazer esse país, essas Américas e esse mundo que nós merecemos e os nossos netos também.
As an example of how much I believe in civil society, 9 years ago, I got together with 40 women. We were in Brasília, our capital, and we ended up forming the Grupo Mulheres do Brasil, the Brazilian women's group, which now has over 106,000 women from every social class, every representation. Now, we believe in policies, and we also believe that public policies have the power to change. Civil society can accomplish all of this with the feminine that is in women and in men, that will help us make a better country, better Americas, a better world for our grandchildren, for our children.
Para terminar, eu quero comprometer com vocês e pedir o compromisso de vocês. Vamos lutar muito para que a gente tenha aquilo que nós merecemos. Oportunidade para todos. Nós não podemos continuar, sabe, principalmente num país como o nosso, onde 30 mil pessoas não têm o que comer. A desigualdade social não é um problema do governo, ela é um problema de todos nós. E todos nós temos responsabilidade. E temos que lutar muito com todas as nossas forças, juntos, para que ela termine. Eu prometo a vocês também que o nosso país é maravilhoso. Eu amo o Brasil. A nossa empresa, há 25 anos, toda segunda-feira, em todas as suas unidades, canta o hino nacional. Eu prometo a vocês, junto com todas as mulheres do Brasil que estão aqui comigo, com todas as mulheres que estão, que nós vamos lutar e fazer o Brasil não do futuro, o Brasil de agora, e peço para vocês nos ajudarem para isso. Muito obrigada de coração. Um beijo para vocês.
As a commitment, I ask you to fight a lot, because we all deserve it. Everybody deserves an opportunity, opportunities for all. We cannot possibly continue to be a country where thousands of people do not have enough to eat. Inequality will not be solved by the government. We need to fight together. You see, I love my country, I love Brazil. And for the past 25 years, we have been singing the national anthem at Magazine Luiza. I promise that we will keep fighting, not for the future, but for the present. And I ask the same of you. Thank you very much.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
That was incredible, and it made me very much miss Brazil. This evening has been an inspiring celebration. On behalf of the dialogue, our distinguished board and members, our honorees, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it is not over. Even though the formal program and my part in it is going to come to a close, please join us outside for some live music and a dessert reception. Good night. Buenas noches.